Hi, welcome to the Bill and Ray Show. My name is Ray Grout, and today we're going to make soap. So grab your goggles and gloves, because soap is messy business.
Welcome to my kitchen. There's a few must-have things before we start. Gloves, a surgical mask to cut through airborne particulates, goggles. These will work just fine, but I like the steampunk goggles. That's how I roll. And the last thing is, make sure you don't use your cooking utensils for making soap. Have dedicated pots and pans and utensils just for making soap. And when you're done, put them away. Don't leave them in the kitchen. Another thing you're going to need is a digital scale. I won this one during an epic battle on eBay for about $9.
Okay, put on your goggles, your gloves, and your mask, and let's make some soap. The first thing I do is weigh out the sodium hydroxide. This is also known as lye. Sodium hydroxide is a high caustic base and alkaline that decomposes proteins at regular ambient temperatures. So don't get this on your skin or breathe it. Thus the gloves and surgical mask. If you somehow do get sodium hydroxide or lye on your skin, you'll immediately know it. This will start to itch and burn. This can be neutralized with vinegar. Vinegar in some cases can be magical stuff. Next, I weigh out distilled water in a separate container. Use distilled water so you don't add unknown substances to your soap. Now it is time to mix your lye and your water together. Make sure you do this under an exhaust fan to draw away the fumes. And never put water into lye. Always mix your lye into water because of this reaction called exothermic. And believe me, you don't want to accelerate the exothermic reaction. Mix well, and soon you will start to feel the solution getting hotter. That is the exothermic reaction doing its thing. This exothermic reaction can easily reach 212 degrees Fahrenheit, the boiling temperature. Once I feel the lye has totally dissolved into solution, I put a cap on it and I set it outside to help it cool down. This process is the heart of soap making and the Frankenstein of science, making water and oil merge. As the lye solution is cooling down, then I start to melt my solids. My main solid ingredients are beeswax from a local beekeeper that I clarify myself, cocoa butter, and shea butter. Let's talk about shea butter for a minute. Shea butter is a fat extracted from the nut of the African shea tree. It is edible and it is used in food preparation in some African countries. It also empowers women in some African countries and helps them establish their own small business. I like using products with a little bit of a social consciousness to them. And it makes me feel good to think maybe I'm helping some woman in Africa support her family by buying and using shea butter. I carefully weigh out these ingredients, and when I do put them on the stove, I keep the heat low. They have a relatively low melting temperature, so it doesn't take much. And I do turn the heat off prior to the full melt. You don't want to overheat these ingredients and you don't want to break down the fats. While my solids are melting, then I weigh out the oils. And I do this in a separate bowl and set it aside. After that, I weigh my coconut oil because it has a very low melting point and I don't want to break down the fats too much. So it's one of the last things I add to the pot of solids before it's totally melted. While I'm waiting for my solids to melt, I filled my sink full of ice, and I brought in the lye solution to put in the ice bath to help it cool down. Now that the solids are melted, I strain the solution through a tea strainer. When shea butter comes in its raw form, it will typically have little pieces of nutshell and organic material that I don't want in my soap. After I have filtered the solids, I transfer the solution back into its original pot. And then I add the oils to the mixture. At this time, I prepare the lavender. We grow this organically on our farm. I harvest it in late July and then hang it up and let it dry for a few months. Once it's dry, I separate the buds from the stems. I put the buds in a jar for my kitchen, and the stems I wrap in little bundles and use for smudging. The lye solution and the fats and oils are now both at 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So I grab my little strainer once again, and I pour the lye solution into the fats and oils through the strainer. The strainer will filter out any little particles of the sodium hydroxide that didn't totally dissolve into the solution. Now I add my lavender that I had ground up into a fine dust and added a little bit of essential oil. Now it's time for the saponification process, mixing the lye and oils together using a stick blender. It only takes a few minutes of mixing this recipe until it hits trace. Trace is when the lye and the oil have emulsified. For me, the perfect trace is when the soap solution is the consistency of a thick pudding. Now it's time to pour the soap into molds. This recipe will produce approximately 5 pounds of soap. I put 1.5 pounds in a smaller mold for hand soaps, and the remainder 3.5 pounds I have put in the larger mold for bath soap. Once the soap molds are full, I pound and shake to relieve any air bubbles. Then I secure the top with a lid and press. I then wrap the soap in a towel and I put it in a warm, dry place to rest overnight. The next day, I remove them from their soap molds and I have 2 very beautiful loaves of soap. I will keep these loaves of soap on their drying rack for another 24 hours in the same warm, dry place.
Hey, Spaceman, what's up?
What happens to the sodium hydroxide? Why is that never shown on the label of soap?
Oh, that nasty lye we talked about at the beginning of the video? It doesn't exist in the final product of soap because of saponification. When the chemical reaction of making soap is complete, the lye and the oil molecules have combined. It chemically changes into glycerin.
Wow, thanks, Gamma Ray. That explains a lot. Have an awesome day. See you later.
So welcome back to my kitchen. The soap has sat for 48 hours now since we made it, and it's ready to cut. And so in this process, I use a miter box and a tape measure. So the first thing I do is I cut off the scruffy ends of the soap, and I'll use these little scruffy ends for hand soap later on. Then I measure the soap into 1-inch intervals. This doesn't have to be perfect, but I like to have approximately 1-inch thick bars of soap. When it comes to the smaller hand soap, I just kind of wing the size, scruffy ends and all. These do come out about a 1/4 inch thick, but it doesn't really matter. I'm not perfect, and I don't try to force my soap to be perfect. Now that I have finished cutting my soap, I will keep it in this basket that's well ventilated so it can cure for 4 to 6 weeks. Curing allows water that is accumulated during the soap making process to evaporate out, making the soap harder and last longer. To double the lifespan of a bar of soap, I cut it in half and keep only half of it in the shower at a time. Moisture and humidity will degrade the soap and shorten its lifespan. And after about 5 weeks of the curing process, this is how the soap looks. After the soap has properly cured, I like to wrap my bath soap in a cotton fabric. This allows it to breathe. In addition, the hand soap, I use a breathable shrink wrap. I finish off the process by applying our label. And here you go, Sage Cottage 406 Lavender Soap. Thank you for joining me in this journey and slippery slope of making soap. I have a lot of people and places I thank in the credits, but one person I want to thank especially. My wonderful son-in-law, John, who inspired me to make soap. Thank you so much, and I am so happy you are part of our family. Have an awesome day, everybody, and remember to be kind to each other